open space, the final frontier. These are the explorations of scientists, sociologists, and AI technologists at Maynooth University. Our mission: to create autonomous drones, air traffic flight management, and seek out new solutions for our civilization. To boldly go where no drone has gone before. Experienced knowledge set free at our open days, November 23rd and 24th.
Maynooth University. No bounds.
Welcome into Sportsmemo's College Football Every Game on the Board podcast with our starter first guest, Robbie Veno. Rob, welcome to the podcast. How are you?
I am good today. Drew, how about yourself? Middle of the week here?
Yeah, I'm doing good in the new format. You know, it's been going well. Good feedback from people on Twitter as far as getting the first segment in on Wednesdays. We can talk about some weekday action, also some big Friday night games as well. We're going to be going 309 down to 340 on the rotation numbers on the games at sportsmemo.com, the odds page, if you want to follow along. And guys, we got a special coupon code for this podcast, actually. It's Friday 9 at checkout. And with that, you get Robbie Veno's Friday night best bet, which he's been really good. His 4 and 5% plays, the top tier totals in college football, 31 and 15 on the year. That's 67%. He's got one going Friday night. Coupon code Friday9 at checkout brings the price from $25 just to $9. And you'll hear that on today's podcast. The coupon code Friday9 for his Friday night play at sportsmemo.com. Robbie, we're going 309 to 340, but we're recording this, about 3:30 Eastern time on Wednesday, and there's two games tonight on the Wednesday card, Buffalo at Ohio and Miami of Ohio at Northern Illinois. Do you have any quick thoughts on the games tonight if somebody's listening real quick and wants to get a bet in?
Yeah, we've seen a push on the total in Buffalo and Ohio for obvious reasons, both very good offenses. I mean, for those unfamiliar, you want to watch Tyree Jackson, the 6'7" quarterback for Buffalo, who can throw it, probably as far as Jamarcus Russell used to throw it for LSU. Pretty accurate deep ball thrower. Anthony Johnson, wide receiver. You got a couple of potential first-round picks on the Buffalo Bulls there. And, of course, Frank Solich at this time of year, despite the fact that they lost their last game real good in November. Both teams very good this year in contention in that MAC East. I didn't play the game myself. I tend to lean towards Buffalo. I think they're the better defensive team. But it's difficult to play against Solich this time of season. The other game, Northern Illinois, we'll see, Drew. It seems as if the offense has sort of perked up the last couple of weeks. It's been dormant all season long. Obviously, Miami O has been putting up points like crazy with Gus Ragland at quarterback. So another game where I didn't play in college football tonight, but two real good games. I mean, if you're just a fan of MAC football middle of the week, two real good games to watch. I probably won't even have a lean type play, just to sit in front of the TV here. Just two good games to watch, and we'll see better things down the road for sure as far as bettable games are concerned.
Yeah, and with the theme of last night's game with Ball State playing really well against Western Michigan and covering the spread, it's tough to go against these home teams, Robbie, especially in the MACtion. I was wanting to get on Buffalo, but, Buffalo, they're going against Ohio. And in Athens, Ohio, I didn't want to play against the Bobcats. That's a tough team. So I was with you as far as Tyree Jackson and company. But the road team, I don't know. I just don't think it's enough points. So I stayed away as well. But let's get into the meat and potatoes. We got 309, 310, Thursday night action. Toledo at Kent State. Looks like the Rockets laying 13 on the road. 59.5 the total, Robbie.
Well, they need a victory here, Drew. There's a lot of teams at this point in time that are – group of five type of teams in college hoops. We call them mid-majors, but these teams are all pushing for bowl bids at this time of year. And just because I know, myself and Andrew Lang, when we did podcasts when Andrew was still a part of Sports Memo, you always preface this by saying, just because they have 5 wins and need a win to gain bowl eligibility doesn't mean they're going to get the win. These teams are 4-6, 5-5 across the land for a reason, but still worth looking at. And in certain situations, you can incorporate it into a handicap. Toledo is 5-5, probably a better team than their record would indicate going against the team in Kent that, as we wind down the season, Drew, this team's floundering a little bit. They get slaughtered by Buffalo last time out, 48-14. Defensively, they started out the year fairly decent, but last week against Buffalo, as I mentioned, they get beat by almost 300 total yards worth of offense, and certainly Toledo can pile up the yards and points as fast as anybody. Been a little bit of a different team without quarterback Mitchell Guadagni, but still very, very capable. I think that if I had to play, I'd probably be on the Toledo side. Just don't see enough spark out of the Kent offense. They went to that real up-tempo offense this season, and per game, their games are averaging about 151 plays per game, so they're moving fast but going nowhere. Usually not a good sign against Toledo, a team that moves real fast and gets in the end zone when they do.
Yeah, Willie Barrett, he's a transfer from Auburn, the Kent State quarterback, and he's a good athlete. He's just not as accurate as I'd like. But Toledo laying 13, I agree with you. I think it's the side. I think the number's a little short. We got Tulane at Houston up next. Looks like 68 the total, with Houston laying 10 at home. Robbie, this Houston team's kind of falling apart. One of the teams I thought might be able, along with Cincinnati, to get UCF a run here in the AAC, but I don't think so. I think they're falling apart here. Tulane playing well as themselves. You think 10's enough to be on the green wave?
Well, it's interesting because there's correlating pieces here with Houston. First of all, the defense has been horrendous all season long from the get-go. If we just look back and know that Houston gave up 439 total yards and 27 points to Rice in their very first game. And we know what Rice is, and that was Rice's very first game under head coach Bloomgren, a guy who brought the Stanford offense to Rice, and he racks up 439, 292 through the air. That was a telling sign right there. You don't know it at the time, but we're 10 games in now. We can see it plain as day. The Houston pass defense, second to last in college football, at least in FCS college football, or FBS, excuse me. And the loss of Ed Oliver goes right along with this recent demise in their defense. Ed Oliver won't play again this week. This will be 4 consecutive games. And, when you're a guy like Ed Oliver, the defensive tackle for Houston, Drew, we see this over the years. Not playing is not such a bad thing. Nick Bosa bailed on Ohio State with an injury to get ready for the pros. Ed Oliver's been talked about as a top 5 pick in the NFL. To see him maybe not play again for the rest of the year wouldn't be a surprise, but it certainly hurts the Houston Cougars' cause on defense because they just can't apply any pass pressure right now. And without that, the secondary, which is bad to begin with, it just becomes magnified. Temple goes for 537 total yardage last week against them in that 59-49 win. Houston's been able to, up until the last 2 games, cover up the defensive deficiencies by just outscoring people. Last couple of weeks, they ran into SMU, got outscored, ran into Temple, got outscored. Willie Fritz probably has a better defense than SMU did, but certainly not better than Temple. So I don't think Tulane's going to stop Houston here. And in fact, if Houston gets Courtney Lark back, one of their best wide receivers, then they're going to explode for points. But the question becomes, like you said, point spread wise, can Houston separate in this game from a Tulane offense that figures to be able to do a lot of damage since they switched quarterbacks to the LSU transfer McMillan? They've been better offensively, and certainly they bring a diverse offense, run or pass, to the table. So, Tulane hasn't been in big games like this very often, but I don't know if they can win. Well, they could probably win the game. They've beaten Memphis, for goodness sakes, but I just don't know that they'll win. But the points do look rather large to me, Drew. I think you'd have to say plus 10 would be a good way to go. Usually the knee-jerk mechanical way to go in Houston games is just to play it over. We're looking at 67.5 here. I think it's been bumped up this afternoon. I think I saw some 68s earlier, so maybe that's the way to go as well. Yeah,
68. Seeing 67.5 at Chris, 68.5 at Heritage. So anywhere in that range across the board, good one to shop around. We got 313, 314 also on Thursday, so a triple header here. FAU at North Texas, 64 the total, with it looks like the Mean Green laying 3.5 or 3 at home.
Yeah, how do you blow a 28-0 lead to ODU last week if you're North Texas? I mean, that was terrible for this team, which under Seth Littrell has been pretty good all season long. But boy, oh boy, that's a damaging loss for this team. Maybe there was some type of 28-0 look ahead to Florida Atlantic on the horizon. I don't know. Very unlike them though, Drew, because they've been so good defensively all season long. I think that's we all know about Mason Fine and the offense, but the unsung heroes, the unsung heroes of North Texas this season has been the defenders. The defensive unit has been tremendous for this team. Last week they get caught up and lose that game. They'll bounce back here, I'm sure. The question becomes, do we believe in what Florida Atlantic has done the last couple weeks of this season? I mean, heading into the FIU game, I remember you and I had that game on our podcast just 2 weeks ago, and we were both firmly in the corner of Florida International on that night. And it was a tight game, 21-14 heading into the fourth, and then a 28-0 fourth quarter has given Florida Atlantic, 5 good quarters in a row now. And all of a sudden, there seems to be this bandwagon for Florida Atlantic. It doesn't show up with bettors. I think it shows up in media attention more than anything right now. Obviously, bettors have pushed this game in favor of North Texas. If FAU's still a banged-up football team, to me, Drew, they're still a one-dimensional offensive football team. North Texas has the goods to be able to slow Singletary and the running game down. And if you put the game on Robeson's shoulders, I'm not so sure Florida Atlantic can win this contest. And you factor in a couple of real beatdowns last year that North Texas was handed to by Florida Atlantic. There's a revenge factor involved here. It's home in Denton, Texas. To me, North Texas has all the components for a much bigger than 3-point victory here. So that's probably going to be the side I look at. I'm just not a firm believer in FAU playing 5 quarters. And now, and the fact that they're one-dimensional offensively, I just don't think that now they're going to go ahead and go to North Texas and win this game. One quick note on North Texas here, Drew. If you bet that their totals all season long and you've played under, this team is 9-0 with a push towards the under. 9-0 under the number with one push. Amazing when you think about, like I said earlier, Mason Fine and that offense that they could play all unders this year, but they have not played one over. There's an instance last week where if you bet over early, you did get paid, but we're using the closing number here for these statistics, and against the closing number, 9-0 to the under with one push.
Yeah, great stat, Robbie. That's a wild one. I didn't know that one. We got Friday night action. Memphis SMU. SMU, one of the teams you just talked about, I believe 5 wins. They got to find a way to either beat Memphis or beat Tulsa in their last game in order to get bowl eligible. We got Memphis laying 8 or 8.5 on the road, 72.5 the total.
Yeah, SMU goes to UConn last week. The good news is they score 62. The bad news is they give up 50 to Connecticut. Now, if you played the total over the number, it was great news, 112. Those are nice when you get those. But for SMU, and I know David Pindell, the quarterback for UConn, is a heavy source of their rush yardage. So when you give up 365 rushing yards to Connecticut, a lot of that is attributed to the quarterback run for the UConn Huskies. But still, that's a horrendous number, Drew. And when you're going to play Memphis and running back Darrell Henderson, that's a difficult task. I don't know what this SMU run defense is going to do. Again, they won't have to worry about the quarterback run in this game, but they still have to be stout at the line of scrimmage against Memphis, and I don't know that they can be. If they can't, that puts Memphis's pass game into effect as well. I could see Memphis scoring a whole bunch here. Last couple of weeks, SMU gave up 31 to Houston, which actually was holding Houston below their season average. But remember, that game had a 90-minute lightning delay in it, and it was kind of scattered with weather second half. So I don't know that Houston got in a real groove in that particular contest. SMU offensively, though, with Ben Hicks in that passing game and the way they've run the football They're a force against the Memphis defense that's not so good either. So that's why we see the total where we see it jacked up all the way to 72.5. I don't know that I can get there. To me, that's a little too much. You're talking about 30. What do we need there? 37 aside in order to get that thing over the number. 5 touchdowns each won't do it. Very possible that you could get 38, 35, but you're cutting it thin. I think I'd probably leave it alone. I don't like Memphis laying points on the road because of their defense. Push came to shove, I'd probably be on SMU plus the 8. Sonny Dykes and his staff have done a real good job since the bye week at turning this season around for their team. 3-1 out of the bye. The only loss was a 26-20 loss to Cincinnati, who, as we know, is one of the best teams inside that conference.
Yeah, Sonny Dykes, one of the more underrated coaches, in my opinion, in the country. We got Boise State at New Mexico up next. Looks like Boise laying 19.5 or 20. Actually, just moved to 20 pretty much across the board now as I'm talking. 63 the total, Robbie.
Yeah, for New Mexico, it's been a revolving door of quarterbacks all season long. The last couple of weeks, what we've seen is a combination of the second-team quarterback Colton Gerhardt, who came back after missing, I think, like 8 games, and third-team quarterback Shaun Jones, a highly touted kid who's bounced around college football, landed here in New Mexico. Better thrower of the deep ball. New Mexico, I think, more potent big play-wise when Jones is the quarterback of this team. Gerhardt, maybe the more consistent, mid-range, accurate type guy. Both bring a certain thing to the table. I don't know which one we're going to see Friday night. It's possible we see both, and I don't think it matters. I think New Mexico's offense is what it is at this point in time with either quarterback. Maybe a hair bit more explosiveness when Jones is on the field just because he throws the deep ball so well. They're going to go up against a Boise State team that's off of a pair of really, really tough games against BYU. If you just look at those two defenses that they faced the last 2 weeks, BYU and Fresno State, for Boise coming into Albuquerque facing the New Mexico defense, which has really begun to erode, and I'll go over some numbers real quick in a couple of seconds, but boy, that's got to look like night and day for Boise and Brett Rippon, a team that has offensive explosiveness. It hasn't shown the last couple of weeks, even though they got victories, hard-fought 21-16, 24-17 wins over the previously mentioned defenses of BYU and Fresno. I think Boise State has a real chance to explode here. We've seen it on occasion this year, Drew. There's 4 instances where they've scored 48 or better, and every time it's really been against the maligned defense, the Air Force Academy, Colorado State, UConn. The surprise probably is the 56 they hung on Troy State to start the year. But Rippon and crew is certainly capable against this New Mexico defense of hanging a bunch of points. The New Mexico defensive efforts, like I say, have really gone downhill as of late. 623 yards allowed to Air Force last week, 704 yards allowed to Utah State 3 weeks ago. And in the middle of that, they gave up 401 to San Diego State, who doesn't move the football whatsoever. Overall in those 3 games, just looking at how much they give up per play, 7.7, 6.2, 8.5 every play. It's a lot of yardage. So I think Boise State can have some success. New Mexico, in my estimation, is always going to have some success offensively. And Boise State, Drew, real quick note here, we touched on it a little bit last week. Boise's committed to using a lot of true freshmen, or sprinkling in even more true freshmen these last 2 or 3 games, because you get the 4-game limit now. And in Boise's case, because their defense has just racked up so many injuries throughout the season, that you're probably going to see some true freshmen get a lot of playing time on the defensive side of the football here. Could help New Mexico out a little bit.
Guys, we got the Saturday slate coming up next. I want to remind you about the coupon code Friday9. That's just the word Friday with the number 9 behind it, and you get Robbie Veno's Friday night best bet. It's a total, and he's been 31-15, 67%. That's year to date, and you can get that for just $9 using the coupon code Friday9 at checkout. Robbie, Saturday slate, 319, 320 in the Big Ten. Indiana at Michigan. This one on Fox, 53.5 the total. Looks like Michigan, the Wolverines, laying 4 touchdowns at home.
Boy, they've been steady too, Drew. I mean, you look for a week where maybe there'll be some let up, but Michigan's getting stronger as the season goes on. Now, maybe, a 42-7 victory over Rutgers isn't quite what you might want. Point spread wise, obviously they're giving 37 in that game, only win by 35, but 42-7 is still 42-7, an absolute rout of Rutgers. The same score the week before against Penn State. In fact, it probably becomes a little bit more impressive to win by 5 touchdowns coming off of the Penn State win. They're hard to bet against right now because there's been no let up. Like I say, they've gotten better as the season's gone on. Shea Patterson not doing what he did at Ole Miss, but a different style offense. He's certainly been every bit as good as he was at Ole Miss, if not a little bit better. With this Michigan Wolverine team. This is a team that I can't get in front of right now. However, laying 28 points, different story. Indiana's got quality athletes at the wide receiver position, and they're capable of making a couple of plays. Michigan only gives up 13 a game. If Indiana makes it to 13, Drew, you have to score 42 again to cover the number. Not impossible, but certainly puts Indiana in pretty good shape here. And throughout the Midwest this week, keep note of the temperatures that some of these games are going to be played in. It's going to be cold just about everywhere. I've seen mid to high 20s for a couple of games, very low 30s. Cold, we saw it last week, and it does not – please don't blanket statement cold weather as a means towards playing under. Because it's all situational. And we saw last week some cold weather games that scored a lot of points. Just want to bring up that the weather's going to be different now this time of season, especially throughout the Midwest and the East Coast. For me, it probably is a game I would leave alone. I could get a little bit interested in that game under the total, though. I just think that Michigan, to me, the game looks somewhere in the 35-10 vicinity. That's only 45 points, and total here is 53.5. To me, that's a little bit high.
Robbie, we got 3-2-1, 3-2-2 Pitt at Wake Forest. Looks like the Pitt Panthers laying 6.5 or 7.61 the total.
Yeah, boy, Pittsburgh has just gone crazy with that rushing game. The last couple of weeks, Olison's been great. 254 against Virginia in a game where they were underdog by 7 points. I think heading into that game, Drew, more of the emphasis was put on the Virginia squad and what they had been doing throughout the season. Pittsburgh comes in, gets the upset victory, then turns around and just plasters Virginia Tech, a team that's been riddled with defensive injuries all season long. 492 yards rushing. I have to go back and check. I don't think I've seen in an FBS versus FBS contest this season 13.7 yards per rush. Go back and take a look and see if there's anything like that. But that's a huge number that Pitt put up on Virginia Tech last week. Wake Forest not necessarily known for their defense, so you could see another big effort here out of the Pitt offense. What Wake Forest will try to do here is Wake Forest will try to tempo Pittsburgh. They run a lot of plays offensively under Dave Clawson, Greg Dortch, a real threat at any given moment. And last week, the backup quarterback, Jamie Newman, came in and played really well. 22 of 33 for 297, 3 touchdowns in that late come-from-behind win at North Carolina State. NC State really should have had more than 23, Drew. They struggled inside the red zone on a few occasions, and it allowed Wake Forest to come from behind and get that win. But the point to be made here, and I think we've made it before, but let's do it again, is that the difference between starting quarterback freshman Sam Hartman, who's done for the season, and the backup Jamie Newman, who played last week, is minimal. In August, right down to about 10 days before the season opener, these guys were neck and neck. Clawson didn't know who he was going to pick as his starting quarterback. An injury to Newman gave the job to Hartman, who then took over, played real well. Now he's hurt. Like I say, Jamie Newman doesn't get picked at all last week. 3 touchdowns, no interceptions. So I could see Wake Forest doing some damage here to Pitt as well. Total here sits at 61 for a Wake Forest game. the way Pittsburgh's playing offense, the way they're able to run, the way Wake Forest cannot stop the run, giving up 203 a game, I think that number may be a little bit low. This is a game where the weather, by the way, is going to be really good. I think it's about 60, 61 degrees there at Wake Forest this week. So good weather game there in the ACC.
Robbie, let's head back up to the Big Ten. We got Iowa at Illinois. Looks like Iowa, the Hawkeyes, laying 14 or 14.5 on the road, 58.5 the total.
Yeah, did a free play write-up for this one, Drew, for anybody who wants to go ahead and read. It's up now at sportsmemo.com. The free play was for the Iowa Hawkeyes here. And, there are reasons to take the points with Illinois. But for me, I just can't get past the discrepancy in defenses here. For Illinois, you've got a team under Lovie Smith that is chasing bowl eligibility, which would be a major, major accomplishment for this team. In order to do that, they have to do the unlikely, which would be beat Iowa this week and follow that up with a road victory against Northwestern final week of the season. Chances of that happening aren't good, but they're still there and it gives Illinois something to play for. But, boy, they can't stop anybody, Drew. 248 on the ground, 285 through the air. Every week that defense just gets pounded. And for Iowa, they're pretty balanced. Nate Stanley has brought a balance. One key thing, and it's in the write-up as well, Nate Stanley's been dealing with a thumb injury ever since the Penn State game, and all reports this week are he's winging it around the yard real good. The thumb is as close to 100% as it's been in the past 3 weeks, so you can expect Iowa to be better equipped offensively. They get one of their top receivers back as well this week. Head coach Kurt Ferentz took a lot of heat for not getting the ball. It's pretty much their top two pass catchers on Iowa, for those who don't know, are both tight ends. And their premier pass-catching tight end didn't see the ball hardly at all last week, only 9 yards receiving. Ferentz took a lot of heat for that in the press conference Monday and promises that they'll get the ball there this week. They'll try and make the situation arise. I think you could get it to anybody you want against Illinois, but Illinois does rush the football real well. The problem here for them is Iowa brings in the seventh rated rush defense in the land. Going to be difficult for Illinois to run, and they also bring in the 27th ranked pass defense. This is the best defensive unit Illinois seen by far. I don't like to lay 14 with Iowa. We always talk about laying double digits with San Diego State and what a lousy idea that is. It's not much better with Iowa, but I think the fundamentals here just point that direction. I could see Iowa winning this game by 3 touchdowns pretty easily.
Robbie, in the Big Ten again, we got 325-326, Wisconsin at Purdue, 53 the total, with the Boilermakers laying 4.5 at home.
Boy, you talk about laying an egg in a football game, Drew. Last week, Purdue was just non-existent offensively. 10 points against a Minnesota defense that 6 days earlier fired their defensive coordinator, Rob Smith, stripped the playbook down to basically nothing, and just told the defense to go out there and see it, hit it, and we'll go from there. And that type of approach was able to stagnate Purdue, which really frustrated me because I had that total over 58.5 or 59. I forget exactly what the number was. Game lands 51. But boy, oh boy, if you'd have told me ahead of time, the total on the game is 59 and Minnesota's going to get you 41, I probably would have, backed up a trailer with the house that I own and shoved it forward with both hands. But Purdue they came up real short, real lame offensively last week. Don't know what it was. I don't expect to see it again out of them. Wisconsin's defense has been banged up all season long. The injuries really well documented, and they start in the secondary. It's just not a Wisconsin defense this season. They don't stop the run. They don't stop the pass. I expect David Blau and company to come back real well here. For Wisconsin, we'll have to see if Alex Hornibrook plays, still dealing with the concussion. But the backup, Jack Cohn, has not been real good for this team. Last week against Penn State, 9 of 20 for only 60 yards. That game, you have to sort of take the statistics with a grain of salt because it was played in some tough conditions. The wind was in excess of 25 miles per hour for much of that contest. It made it difficult to move the football. But Jack Cohn isn't the answer at quarterback, and Hornibrook may have his faults, but certainly Wisconsin's a better team with him at the helm. I think Purdue bounces back pretty good here. I give credit to Paul Chryst and the staff to have Wisconsin in the position that they're in, 6-4 in a bowl game. Chance with 2 wins here to be 8-4, despite the numerous amount of injuries that they've had. Just seems like every week a new one has arisen. But I really expect Purdue to bounce back in a big way here.
All right, like in the Boilermakers there to finish off the Big Ten. Actually, we got a couple more on the segment, but we're heading to the ACC now. We got Virginia at Georgia Tech. Looks like 53 the total. Looks like Georgia Tech laying 7, mostly 6.5 though at Bobby Dodd on Saturday.
Yeah, their rushing game has been virtually unstoppable the last few weeks, Drew. I mean, Miami is a real good front 7. And Georgia Tech was able to go for 231 yards rushing, barely thrown the ball the last 3 weeks. How about this? The last 3 games Georgia Tech's played, they've thrown 7 passes. That's crazy. It. 7 passes, right? They've got 205 rushing plays, 7 passes. Just to show you the dominance in the run game here. That option is well-oiled, working on all cylinders. And Virginia for much of the year has been a real good defense. But like I just mentioned, Miami's a real good front 7, and they couldn't stop it. So I don't know that Virginia will be able to stop it. Liberty ran for 205 against Virginia last week. Pittsburgh ran for 254 against Virginia the week before. Something's been exposed here with this Virginia run defense that had looked good all season long. But when I went back over the opponents, you could almost see that their numbers may have been a product of the opposition. Expect Georgia Tech to run the football here. Can Bryce Perkins and company keep up? The question mark for Georgia Tech defensively since the start of the season has been the secondary. And I'm not so sure that Virginia is good enough to take advantage of their secondary. And truth be told, the secondary for Georgia Tech has not played bad. The last 3-4 weeks, they've been getting better. So I think Georgia Tech, I know it's down to 6.5 now, but they just seem to be the better team at this point of the season. Virginia was a really, really good 2/3 of the season story, but just looking at their play the last couple of weeks, you can see they're deteriorating a little bit. And maybe they're, regressing back to the mean, so to speak. Maybe they're showing us you're just – because of the schedule that they played, they looked a little bit better.
Yeah, Georgia Tech had a rough go of it in the beginning of the season. It ended with that Clemson game. They got a little bit of a break and then went back to Bowling Green. And you're right, Robbie, their offense has just been humming. Outside of the Duke game, I mean, they've been putting up big points, even against Miami, kind of beating Miami. And Miami's got a good defensive front, so it's just that option offense is so tough to prepare for. Robbie, I know we don't normally do this on Every Game of the Board podcast, but want to bring up something that I've thought about. Why even teams in like the SEC and the Big Ten, especially like a Vanderbilt or a team in the Big Ten like Illinois, well, why do you think they don't kind of take in the triple option? Just because it's so tough to prepare for, and if you're the only team in the conference, it's shown that you can win ball games. I'm kind of surprised, and I've always wondered that. Do you have any opinion on that? I think maybe a decade ago you probably could have done it, Drew, but I just don't think it's easy to recruit to anymore. I mean, kids don't want to go play option football. Look what happened at Arizona when U of A was about to hire Navy coach Ken Niumatalolo as their head coach, and Khalil Tate steps up and says, I'm not playing no stinking option. Get him out of here. And the guy's about to sign the paper, and he doesn't get the job because the quarterback doesn't want to play the option. So I think that's probably what it all boils down to. Maybe a little more than 10 years ago, maybe 15 years ago if you wanted to implement it then, before these high schools got so pass happy, 5 wides, no backs, up-tempo offenses, you probably could have started a program that way. Look at Bob Davie tried it too, right? Bob Davie had it for 6 years, and then this year got out of it, and they went more to the Rich Rodriguez
run-heavy spread, or it's kind of a balanced type of spread, but I think it's more run-oriented, Rich Rod's version. Calvin McGee, the offensive coordinator out there at New Mexico, worked underneath Rodriguez and brought that system to Davies' New Mexico team, which had been successful with the option. But even he said, this is a breath of fresh air. We needed a change. And in order to get kids in nowadays, you can't go to their home and tell them that you're running the option offense because they're not coming to your school.
Yeah, and I just wanted to bring it up, Robbie. We normally don't do that on the Every Game on the Board podcast, but feel free to reach out to Rob Veno on Twitter at Rob Veno Sports, or myself at Drew Martin Betts, or the Sportsmemo Twitter handle at Sportsmemo. But Robbie, let's get back to the Every Game on the Board podcast. 329-330 Northwestern at Minnesota. Back to the Big Ten. I promise you, 48 the total. Looks like the Gophers laying 1 or 1.5 at home.
Yeah, that top of the rotation loaded with Big Ten games, as usually it is because they're the early starts. But, hey, hats off to Pat Fitzgerald one more time for doing what he's done with this Northwestern program, a team that started the year with a banged-up quarterback off an ACL injury in a bowl game, came back a little bit early. Clayton Thorson did. They got that huge win to start the season against Purdue. And even though they're only 6-4, and the season's been a little back and forth, it's been good enough to win their side of the Big Ten and put them in the Big Ten championship game. Right now, 5-4-1 against the spread are the Northwestern Wildcats. It seems like we say the same thing about them every year, Drew, because they virtually are the same team every single year. For Pat Fitzgerald, this is the third consecutive year that his team's gotten off to a opening slow start. The first 3 games of the year 2 years ago, terrible. The first 3 games last year, terrible. First 3 games this year, terrible. But then he turns the program around. Since that point in time, Northwestern is a 5-2 football team straight up. They're going to have their hands full here with a Minnesota offense that PJ Fleck has I shouldn't even say he really has, Drew, diversified this offense and made it such a balanced attack. And he's had to use freshman quarterbacks all season long. The newest, Tanner Morgan, has been really good throwing the football. Zach Annexted, the walk-on who started the year, got some playing time last week, but virtually he's been demoted to second team behind Tanner Morgan at this point in time. But PJ Fleck has found wide receivers. I mean, you watch Minnesota the last 3 weeks and you watch their wide receivers. If you have a conversation with somebody about Minnesota Gophers football and they're not a fan of the university, the first thing that pops into their head is not going to be, man, that team can throw the football. They've got really good wide receivers. But that's the case with this team right now, and it fits here hand in glove because Northwestern's defensive secondary is an absolute mash unit at this point in time. They're down 3 starters for this game. Watch Pat Fitzgerald in his press conference Monday talk about they're just going to have to find a way to piece things together. 26-degree weather in Minnesota for this contest. They play in an outdoor stadium now, but I believe they're the only team, Drew, where their home field, the turf is heated. So it kind of helps a little bit, I guess, to have a heated surface. I don't know that 26 degrees is going to stop Minnesota from throwing against a depleted Northwestern secondary. And Clayton Thorson and company probably come back at Minnesota, which has been a real poor defensive unit up until last week. We talked about them a few minutes ago. Fire the DC, simplify the game plan, shut down Purdue. But I just don't see that as being the norm out of New Mexico. PJ Fleck's a great motivator, and the kids love to play for him and row your boat and all that other stuff. But I don't think that we're going to see another defensive effort as good as we saw last week against Purdue. Total's real low here for a college football game, 47.5. Maybe worth a look.
Robbie, heading to the ACC, we got Duke at Clemson, 57.5 the total. Clemson now laying more than 4 touchdowns, 28.5, pretty much across the board. I mean, Jones, the quarterback, Daniel Jones for Duke, he's looked good. Has had good games and bad games. He's going to have to have a heck of a game for Duke to stay into this one. You think Dukey's plus 4 touchdowns is worth a look?
Yeah, generally speaking, you would think so. just because David Cutcliffe is that good of a head coach as far as getting his team prepared, just because David Cutcliffe brought a defensive unit into the season that was pretty highly touted and at times has played real good football. But for them, they've got one real key injury to keep your eyes attached to, see how it goes with Joe Giles Harris, their top linebacker, maybe their best defensive player, certainly their best tackler. And if he can't go against this Clemson rushing attack, that could be problematic for Duke. Just a quick glance at Duke, when you're going over their numbers, you find real quickly that they've been gashed 2 of the last 3 weeks by Pitt and UNC. Pittsburgh goes for 54 points and 634 yards, and UNC in a losing effort scores 35 and gets 536 yards. That's 1,155 yards against 2 teams. The game in between is against Miami of Florida, a game which Duke won, but still gave up 411 yards. So to me, when you start taking their first 7 games of the year and seeing what they were allowing, and then take the last 3 and seeing how the defense is going down, this has been kind of a constant theme or common denominator of this podcast so far, Drew. It's defenses that have wilted as the season has gone on. We're into game 11 now. And for teams that don't have extreme depth, it becomes difficult. And Duke's going to have to line up against this Clemson offensive line, a team that's just been burying team after team. Now, last week, BC gave them a real good fight, but still 27-7. I'm talking all about Duke trying to handle the Clemson offense. We haven't even spoken about Daniel Jones and company trying to handle the Clemson defense, which has been as good as any in the country this season. They've only given up 127 points on the year. So it's a tall order. My first inclination, to tell you the truth, when I saw the total at 57.5 was like, well, this will get over the number because Clemson's going to get 40 and 40 plus probably, and Jones might be worth 17 here. But you start looking into it a little deeper, and you have your worries about whether or not Duke can get that amount of points on the board. We'll see. Duke's a pretty well-rounded football team, and like I said, I don't generally like going against David Cutcliffe because I know he'll have a solid game plan. But I do think that defense is really on a downslide here, and you don't want to be on a downslide against a team like Clemson that's been putting up points like crazy lately.
Yeah, good point. I mean, I was looking towards Duke as well, Robbie, but you bring up the fact Duke's defense has kind of fell off a little bit. I could see him kind of getting steamrolled with Clemson not even really having to put the ball in the air too much. So they could make that 28.5 look a little short, I agree. Heading to the Big Ten once again, we got Penn State at Rutgers 28. Nittany Lions are laying on the road 50 the total.
Yeah, we don't have to spend too much time here because there's only so much you can say about Rutgers. I mean, they're in the game with a point spread, so obviously, for purposes of our podcast, Drew, there's certainly reasons why you can play Rutgers, and I would start with this. They're 1-9 straight up, but they're 5-5 against the spread, which just goes to show you even the worst teams get the money. And this team's gotten the money 50% of the time so far this season. So you can't just look at it and shrug off Rutgers. If nothing else, Chris Ash's team plays with heart. It just offensively, because of the erratic quarterback play, and the freshman's going to be good down the road. But at this point in time, too many mistakes. Penn State got back into the saddle last week, got themselves a victory. James Franklin's had a pretty... around these parts of Pennsylvania, we hadn't heard a lot of negative talk about James Franklin until he came out with that tongue lashing after the Ohio State game and followed it up with only a 2-2 record. Last week helped him a lot, the 22-10 win over Wisconsin, and they're going to look to close strong. They've got 2 winnable games here against Rutgers and Maryland. So I think the offensive slide that you've seen, point production-wise, with Trace McSorley at quarterback here, more due to the fact that they went through a real tough stretch of defenses. Remember, 3 of their last 5 games have been against Michigan State, Michigan, and Iowa. Really, really good defenses. And McSorley's been banged up a little bit. Here, his last 2 games of the season, those aren't going to be problems. Rutgers nowhere near the defensive ability of the teams that Penn State's played, and certainly Maryland doesn't have that ability either. So I think that Penn State might close strong. But like I say, Rutgers is overcompensated for in a negative way by the odds makers. So you always get a little extra value with Rutgers. We'll see if Penn State can cover here. I wouldn't play it, but I do think Penn State's going to show pretty well against inferior opponents the last couple weeks of the year.
Robbie, we've got 2 teams vying for bowl eligibility. Kansas State with 4 wins, Texas Tech with 5 wins. Tech also the major quarterback issue with Bowman and his lung problem. He's doubtful right now, according to Don Best. But laying 6, that's the Red Raiders on the road, 57 the total.
Yeah, and boy, the backup, 3rd team actually, Jet Duffy, is a frustrating quarterback to watch because, boy, when he's right, that offense sails with him because he brings the extra element of being able to make plays with his legs that, generally speaking, Texas Tech quarterbacks don't have. But Jet Duffy can run, and he can outrun an entire defense. Now, last week, I think he had 2 red zone fumbles in the 3rd quarter alone, or maybe it was at the end of the first half and then one and again in the 3rd quarter, which cost Texas Tech a couple of scores. But you know what? They were way behind Texas, and he brought them back in a hurry into that 34-34 tie, and then they lose 41-34 because the defense couldn't hang on. Duffy's a guy who the lights go off for half the game and the lights come on for half the game, so they're going to get their share of points. They're just not going to score in the consistent manner that they would with Bowman, and they're not going to score through the air as easily as they do with Bowman. Kansas State, really won't threaten them at all defensively, Drew, and they probably won't threaten Texas Tech at all offensively either. And I can say that with a little bit of confidence, despite the fact that Texas Tech is another defense that's gone straight downhill. Now, attribute it to the fact that they play in the Big 12. We get that. But I think 7 games into the season, there was a lot of praise being heaped upon the Texas Tech defense for being much improved, sort of a continuation of the way they played last year. Defensive coordinator David Gibbs getting a lot of that praise, and maybe rightfully so, but boy, the last few games, you could see the difference. Iowa State, 422 yards. Oklahoma, 683 yards. Texas, 469 yards. K-State's not capable of putting those type of numbers up. So I think this is a pretty good game for Texas Tech to get back on track, no matter who the quarterback is. If they can't beat this team by 17, 20 points, then they probably can't beat anybody in the Big 12 by that margin at this point in time. Fighting for bowl eligibility, like you say. Bill Snyder's team, they've had plenty of opportunities, Drew, because you even started this analysis by saying 2 teams vying for bowl eligibility. Kansas State has had their chances throughout the season, and they just seem to come up short each and every week. So I wouldn't play Kansas State with anybody else's money, certainly not going to play it with mine. I think Texas Tech, despite the quarterback situation, no matter who plays quarterback, I shouldn't even say despite, because it's not a negative thing, but whoever plays quarterback, they should be able to cover this number.
2 more games to finish it here, Robbie. And guys, remember the coupon code Friday9 at checkout for Robbie Veno's Friday night best bet. He's been hitting 67% on the year with his best bets. Coupon code Friday9 at checkout for $9 for the play. Normally $25. We got 337-338 heading to the AAC to finish out this section of the podcast. UConn at ECU, 68.5 the total, with East Carolina laying 17 at home.
Don't think we'd say that too often,
no,
right?
Not at all. But going against UConn, Robbie.
Yeah, boy, oh boy, you feel for him. Obviously, somebody like myself who's close to the program, UConn, you see what they're going through right now. Bringing back Randy Edsall the second time, it's a grassroots effort here. They're definitely there are so many freshmen on the field for that team. It's ridiculous, and not just redshirt freshmen, true freshmen. And they're going through a hard learning process in a league that has become, over the last 4 years or so very offensive heavy. I mean, that league has evolved from when it first started to what it is now, where you have multiple teams that can put up points at the blink of an eye. So for UConn to have that many true freshmen running around on defense, it's just a difficult situation. East Carolina, unlike UConn, has really been, Drew, pretty stout at the point of attack as far as run defense is concerned, only giving up 163 rushing yards a game. As good as Willie Fritz's team is at running the football, they only allowed 163 yards last week. They played Tulane tooth and nail, 24-18 final in that game. East Carolina gets the cover. The new quarterback, Ehlers, the dual threat quarterback, probably a better runner at this time than he is a passer, but certainly he's shown flashes of being able to move that ECU offense downfield through the air. Scotty Montgomery's team still plays at extreme pace. UConn plays at an extreme pace. I'd be interested to see, because Tulane works with a running quarterback as well, if in fact East Carolina can shut down David Pindell, who I think, might be one of the 3 best running quarterbacks in college football. I mean, if he were at a bigger university, you would hear so much about this kid, or a better university as far as football is concerned. But we'll see if East Carolina can slow him down. UConn, if nothing else, gets a real boost of confidence from putting 50 points on the board against SMU. They chased all day. They finally got under the number and wound up covering that point spread. ECU's been pretty tough, like I say, against the run, though, so it'll be a tough task for Pindell. Kevin Mensah, the running back for UConn, also had a big day last week. You hate to lay 17 with East Carolina. I don't think I could do it, but I don't think I could take 17 with UConn. That puts you, if you're going to play the game, on the total. And at this point in time, there's really nowhere else to play UConn totals except for playing them over. The problem with that is, for the most part, this ECU team has been an under football team, 4-5 over-under on the season for ECU.
Robbie, last game up, we got USF at Temple, 12 noon Eastern kickoff here. Looks like Temple laying 14 or 13.5 at home, 60.5 the total. Robbie, I think this total, the way Temple's offense has been going up and down the field lately, is a little low here. I like the over. How do you feel?
Well, I think the reason why Temple games have really exceeded the total the last couple of weeks is because they had somebody that would go up and down the field with them. Houston will get up and down the field with you. We saw that 59-49 the week before. I did happen to have that play myself over in the Central Florida game. Of course, we know UCF is going to go up and down the field. So the 108 and the 92. 200 points in the last 2 Temple games that have been scored. Probably not going to see it this week because South Florida has just become dormant offensively. You don't know what happened to this team as far as offense is concerned. We'll see if their starting quarterback can go this week. Blake Barnett did not play last week, and that's a hindrance for USF when Blake Barnett can't go. But he just hasn't been the same quarterback as Rose was for this team the previous couple of years, and I think that's where it all begins and ends as far as South Florida's demise offensively. I think Temple's defense can regroup and have a pretty good game here. I would look to them as a side in this contest more than I would to the total. Charlie Strong down there still running that fast-paced offense, but they're just not getting anything done on the offensive end. Last week against Cincinnati, a good defensive team, 23 points. Before that, 15 points. I don't know that they can victimize the Temple defense the way UCF and Houston did the last 2 weeks. And if Temple has the opportunity, Drew, in my mind at least, if they have the opportunity to get out in front and then relax and just make sure Armstead gets the ball and they don't have to push downfield. Armstead had a big day last week too, running the football. But if it goes that way, maybe the total comes closer than it might look at first glance. I don't know. I haven't played it yet, but certainly Temple has shown the world that if they have to score, they can score. Houston is a team anybody can score against, but the UCF game, putting up 40 against them was a pretty good sign.
Robbie, anything else you want to throw out before we shut this down?
Wow, I don't know what else we could throw out there, Drew. We're going to throw some more out there tomorrow, though, because we'll be back with more games. These boards with the bye weeks virtually going away at this time of the season. The college football board is extended again, so we'll get to talk about a lot more games tomorrow. Of course, the SEC is often playing a lot of non-conference stuff as well, where we don't see lines available across the board at this point in time. We won't see that till Friday, Saturday. But, hey, anybody betting the MAC tonight, once again, good luck with those couple of games. Maybe you want to play first half or second half in a couple of those. We could throw that advice out there. And I wish I had my first half, second half numbers available right in front of me. Maybe I could recommend something first half, second half, but maybe I'll throw it up on Twitter.
All right, follow Robbie on Twitter at Veno Sports. And, guys, we'll be back tomorrow with the rest of the College Football Every Game on the Board podcast. Remember the coupon code Friday9 for Robbie Veno's Friday night play for just $9. All right, we'll be back tomorrow. Best of luck with your bets.
Open space, the final frontier. These are the explorations of scientists, sociologists, and AI technologists at Maynooth University. Our mission: to create autonomous drones, air traffic flight management, and seek out new solutions for our civilization. To boldly go where no drone has gone before. Experience knowledge set free at our open days, November 23rd and 24th.
Maynooth University. No bounds.